Yeah. Couldn't unmute, couldn't unfreeze. Good evening, everybody. Happy Wednesday, November 16th. If we can please call this meeting to order. I see that we have quorum, so we want to get started, at least with the roll call here.
Okay, roll call. Director Alvarado, Director King Meredith. I saw her. Can I give her just a second?
Looks like they're both connecting to audio.
Okay, Director Weiner.
Present.
Vice President Sudduth. And President Zepeda.
Present.
Director Alvarado.
In the house.
And Director King Meredith.
I think our audio is not connected yet.
Okay, cool. We have a quorum at 6:31.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now it's the time for public comment for items not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we receive any public comments or requests to speak for the meeting?
We did not receive any written comment. We have several attendees with us this evening. If anyone would like to speak on items not on the agenda, please raise your hand now. Seeing no hands raised, we have no public comment.
Thank you so much. And as a reminder, Vice President Sudduth will be serving as our parliamentarian for tonight's meeting. And then just to check in, Vice President Sudduth, are you ready to take on this role?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Given the very full agenda this evening, I move that the board consider items 6 and 7 on the regular calendar under consent calendar, and that the board consider item 12, closed session conference with labor negotiations, first on the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah. There we go.
Perfect. Thank you. We got a motion and a second. Are there any comments or questions? Any debate? I don't see any hands up or anything. Perfect. Then, Madam Clerk, if you can please take the roll.
Sure.
Excuse me, President Zepeda, before
yes.
you move on, we were also asking if the board would consider moving items 6 and 7 on the regular calendar to the consent calendar as well.
Yes, yeah, that was part of what I mentioned
It's
as well.
part of it. It's part of the
I'm
motion.
sorry.
It's part of, yeah, it's part
Sorry, I
of the
missed
motion.
it. Sorry.
Yep, no
Part of
worries.
the-
So
And
Again,
President
the
Zepeda,
motion-
can we check to make sure that Director King Meredith, if she's back, if she's able to, if she's online?
I don't see her having a microphone.
Because she was on before the meeting started. We could see her video.
Yeah, Lisa, would you mind, or would someone be able to reach out to her and see if she needs some help?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are in the middle of a motion. So
Okay.
there's no questions or comments from the director. So Madam Clerk, if you can please take the roll.
Sure. And President,
Quick comment.
your motion and David's second.
Correct.
Thank you. Director Alvarado,
Yes.
Director King Meredith, Director Weiner,
Yes.
Vice President Sudduth,
Yes, ma'am.
President Zepeda.
Yes,
Okay, and the motion passes with 4.
perfect. Thank you so much. Then with that, I'd like to have the general manager to please lead us through the rest of the agenda at this time.
Okay, thank you, President Zepeda. So the first item on our agenda is closed session per the approval of the board. And our General Counsel Witt will now read us into the closed session.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
All right. The board will now convene into closed session pursuant to the Brown Act Government Code Section 549576 in connection with a conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated representatives are Tanya Williams and Charlie Howard. The employee organization is AFSCME Public Employees Union Local Number 1, Administrative Clerical Employees Unit, and Field Operations Unit. Now is the time for any public comment on this item. If there's none, then the board will convene in a separate Zoom session and return to this session once the closed session is concluded. Madam Clerk, have we had any public comments on this item or request to speak?
We have not received any written public comments on this item, and our attendees, if there is any attendee that would wishes to make a public comment, now's the time to raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, there is no public comment.
All right, thank you. We'll now convene into our closed session Zoom meeting through a separate link, and we'll return to this open session once it's concluded.
Okay, before we leave, did we get emailed that separate link for Zoom?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
it should have
be in
come
your
to you
inbox.
this morning.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you all. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We don't have all the directors in yet. So we'll be back at 7:30, but we have the majority. So let's go ahead and get us back into the meeting because it is a very long meeting. So we have quorum, we continue to have quorum. Let's see here.
President Zepeda, would you like me to bring us back into session?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. The board is reconvening in open session at 7:31 p.m. The board met in closed session pursuant to the Brown Act, Government Code Section 54957.6 to receive a briefing from and to provide direction to its labor negotiators. There is no reportable action.
Thank you. All right. With that, you don't see Lisa, you there? Oh, there we go. Just connecting to audio. Lisa, can you hear us okay? Yeah, perfect. All right, then we are going, giving the meeting back over to you. If we can bring us over to the consent calendar, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, give me 1 second, making sure I'm off mute. Okay. Okay, so the next item on the calendar is the consent calendar, which consists of items 1 through 7. Have we received any written comments on these items, or are there any members of the public who wish to speak on any of the consent items?
We have received no written comments, and all the attendees on our meeting right now, if you'd like to make a public comment, now's the time to raise your hand. Seeing none, we have no public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. There are no public comments, and we would recommend the board approve these items 1 through 7 on the agenda and would request a motion to do so.
So moved.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Do you have a hand, President Zepeda?
Oh, you had a hand?
All
Oh,
right.
No, it's fine. The second is fine. We have discussion, sir.
okay.
Thank you. Director Wiener, discussion.
Yes, I don't have any items to pull, but I'd like to make a statement regarding the entire package. Would this be the appropriate time?
You're saying in regards to the whole package, meaning the whole package of the consent calendar or the whole
Yeah,
agenda itself?
the entire consent calendar.
I think you can go ahead and make a comment.
This is the
Before we move on to the
appropriate.
vote.
Yeah,
Go
we're
ahead.
just going to go to a vote, right? So this would be the appropriate time?
Yes.
Okay.
It's fine.
It seems to me that every meeting we have to approve through the consent process additional spending on contractors and their existing contracts. This consent calendar consists of the approval of $4,285,774 worth of outside consulting or operations. Some of the IT contracts are for 4 or 5 years worth of extensions. Of course, district staff presents a good case to add more money and extensions to the contracts. However, at some point, this practice should be reduced as staff becomes more experienced at predicting costs and planning. In the case of IT, why are we outsourcing this function? Why are we not bringing in-house employees that can do this work? There seems to be years and years of it. In the case of Synagro contract, which will ultimately be $8 million, was the purchase of a belt press and staffing to run it considered? I hope to see this practice of hiring of contractors become less of a standard operating procedure and become an exception. I do not support turning over the operations of the district to for-profit corporations. Their goals of profits do not align with our ratepayers who are not paying to profit outside entities. That's my comment.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other comments on the consent calendar? All right, hearing none. Madam Clerk, if you can please call the roll.
Sure. Director Alvarado,
Yes.
Director King Meredith,
Yes.
Director Wiener,
No?
Vice President Siddett,
Yes.
and President Spada.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes by 4.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is item 8 under our regular calendar, which is a request to adopt the West County Wastewater Sewer System Capacity Charge Study and direct the general manager or designee to implement the recommendations contained in the report, including incorporation into the proposed fees and charges ordinance. Madam Clerk, have there been any written communications on this item?
No, we have not received any written comment or public comment on this item. Our attendees, if you'd like to make a public comment, now is the time to raise your hand. Seeing none, we have no public comment.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I'd like to turn the discussion over to Justin Level, our Director of Administrative Services.
Good evening, President Cepeda and members of the board. I'm Justin Lovell, Director of Administrative Services. The item tonight before you is a presentation of a study that we had a consulting firm Stantec conduct for us to review our what are now called sewer connection fees. We recognize that it's been several years since we've reviewed these fees in detail, and so we asked Stantec to kind of look at everything and help us identify methodologies and calculate what a fee should be. And we'll have I'm introducing tonight as well as Sally Van Etten with Stantec. She will be giving us the full presentation. But before I hand this over to Sally, just to mention that as part of the study, Stantec put together, they looked at essentially all of our data and resources, looking at our the flow, the chemical demand, looking at all of our capital projects, looking at the value of our assets. So they took quite a bit of data, as well as internally, as well as from external sources, to come up with this proposed methodology and process. And we're also, part of the recommendation is to change the title from sewer connection fees to sewer capacity charges. And Sally can get into a little bit more detail about why that is. And just to note that the recommended charges would be actually a significant reduction from what they currently are. We can go into more detail about that. And just last to note that this study was presented to the Finance Administration Committee last week, and they recommended that this goes to the full board for review. So I'll have to pass it over to Sally to lead us through our presentation.
Good evening, everyone. As Justin described, we have been working on a wastewater capacity charge study. I do have a presentation prepared for you, and with your approval, I will probably jump right to it if that's okay with everyone. Great. I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if everyone can see that. Can I get a thumbs up if anyone?
Not yet.
Not yet. Not sure.
Can't see it yet.
Can't see it.
I could try it again. Perhaps I didn't do it right. How about now?
All right, now we can see it.
Excellent. All right, so tonight it is November 16th, 2022, and it's a pleasure to be with you. We have been working on this study, a little trigger finger, for quite a while, and our agenda is going to cover why update the capacity charges, what are the main changes to the charges, both in terms of methodology and magnitude. We will briefly discuss the methodology. I want to briefly identify some of our key assumptions. Go and present the new capacity charges. I show you a slide regarding benchmarking, by which we mean a survey of surrounding areas and districts that were identified for us to look at in comparison to West County wastewater. And then there'll be a opportunity for any questions. I also want to point out that we have a draft final report that I believe was provided to you, which has all of the details, including all of the detailed calculations and how we got to things in that report as well. So I am prepared to dive into the details if there are questions, but the bulk of the presentation will be a little higher level than that. So why update the capacity charges? As Justin mentioned, it is part of an overall review of ordinances and charges that the district is embarking upon and midway through. When you have charges and rates, for example, it is recommended typically that you review those types of charges or rates every 5 years. As you know, we recently assisted the district with updating the sewer rates. And as part of that contract, we were asked to additionally look at some of the district's processes and also some of their charges, including the connection fees, as they are now called. Why, every 5 years it's suggested to review them. Sometimes all that is necessary is just an inflation increase. And I believe, Justin, wasn't it about 7 years ago that last occurred with your existing documentation?
That is correct. And there was inflation.
And so when we were asked to look at this, we took actually kind of a broader, more holistic look, and something that we noticed right away is that conditions in your district have really changed since the last time the methodology was sort of comprehensively reviewed. And in your particular case, you're no longer a district as you were maybe the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where you had a fair amount of undeveloped land left. There actually is not very much undeveloped land left. So what we tend to say is that a district has matured. And by that, we mean it's been around for a while and there's not a lot of room for growth. Importantly, for this calculation, there is remaining capacity in your system. And one other caveat, the asset base of your facilities, they're still functional and you've done a good job in keeping them up and will continue to do that through your rates. But the asset base has aged significantly. So those were our observations. Justin also alluded to this. Why the name change? For a couple of reasons. There can sometimes be confusion actually between connection fees. In some districts, connection fees means like literally digging up the road to connect the new house to the existing system. And that's a time and materials kind of charge. This is something different. This is really looking at what capacity remains in the system that new development can use. And that, hence the name capacity charge, is both more accurate and more descriptive for your particular situation. As Justin mentioned, there's been a significant decrease in the amounts of the capacity charges based on our analysis, and I'll describe that in a little more detail. We also endeavored to simplify the customer class structure and process of implementing the charges. And we just always note that when we use these charges, and we did it based on a buy-in methodology, which I will explain in a bit more detail in just a few moments. But these are not charges that you can then put into your general fund. It's not the way you've been using your connection fees either. You've been appropriately segregating those funds. But rather, these funds should be used for costs associated with the assets that are providing that capacity that new development is available to take advantage of. So I mentioned that there's a couple of different methodologies. There's actually a few more than this, but these are the two basic kinds. On the left, we have what is called the buy-in. That's the methodology that we suggested for your district. And it's based on your existing system's value divided by your existing system's capacity. And it's calculated in terms of EDUs, but also gallons per day and some of your strength measures such as total suspended solids and biological oxygen demand. So that has to do with your treatment and strength. And the reason why the buy-in methodology is more appropriate in your particular case, as I mentioned, new connections pay for available capacity that's already been built in the existing system. If you have a quickly growing and expanding district, you more often see what we call incremental methodology, and that's a case where you would have large planned expansions of infrastructure, and then the math would be those planned expansion costs divided by the projected capacity that those brand new facilities would be providing. The same overall concept is applies to both. You want new connections to pay for the capacity that they are going to receive. This is a slide just to make a couple of points. We looked at different data sources, including your district's asset register. We looked at your bond proceeds from 2021 as a way to allocate costs between those flow costs and treatment costs, because different customers have different demands on those, most prominently residential versus commercial. We looked at debt service, but then we backed out any principal that was not already been paid down. So we're trying very conservative and not overstating value. We also used what we call replacement cost, new less depreciation. Again, that's just realizing that some of your assets are quite old. If you had a car and it's a perfectly functioning, well-maintained Toyota, but it's not brand new, it doesn't mean it's not worth anything, even if it's old, but what it does mean it's not a brand new facility. We also relied on EB-MUD for water customer data. The reason for that is that we don't have meters on sewage, so we make estimates of flow based on average winter use. And we also used EB-MUD customer strength to approximate the typical strength for flows for West County wastewater customers. Again, this is an overview. It's all detailed in the report if you really want to dive into the calculations. I've already been mentioning there's a couple of bases for the system capacity calculations. One is flow. We looked at the available capacity when your I&I is factored in, and then loading pertains to strength. Something else that we did is we defined strength thresholds for your domestic commercial versus high commercial. Your process used to be that you would have set amounts for residential, but your commercial customers would be on a case-by-case analysis. And there are some pretty normalized thresholds that Metcalf and Edie, which is an industry standard firm that sets these types, does research and sets these types of thresholds for strength, provides. And so it seems a lot simpler for implementation of the charges to make a distinction between domestic commercial and high commercial, and it really has to do with your strength in terms of treatment. We used a unit cost approach. You'll see that there's a scaling. Larger customers, whether it be residential or commercial, have higher charges, and then there's different charges for different customer classes. We thought this was a pretty interesting graph and some analysis we did. You might ask, well, what's, we have a rated standard for our wastewater treatment plant of 12.5 million gallons per day. What's interesting about this chart is you'll see a couple of times where you have vastly exceeded some of that inflow. And you'll see sometimes where you've gotten close to your maximum rated capacity. The point here is that we looked at really what was a functional capacity. And again, driving home the other point, which is there is some capacity left, enough we feel for most of the projected, if not all of the projected new growth remaining in the district, but there's not tons of capacity left. So you're unlikely to be building a new wastewater treatment plant, but you're also going to be, you're not having a huge amount of excess capacity in terms of flow. You do happen to have quite a bit of remaining capacity in terms of your strength treatment. So these are your existing charges. So as of July 1st, 2022, if you go to your website, you will see that a single family charge is 11,000 plus change. Your multifamily charge is lower. Your domestic strength, it is a separate category, but you'll note that it says it varies by service unit. So it's a case-by-case application, and commercial non-domestic strength is varies by service unit as well. So again, we are consolidating single family and multifamily into one residential category, and then we're providing some thresholds so that staff people can look at the overall type of new development coming in and make a determination without having to necessarily do a case-by-case analysis. And these are the new rate structures. Remember that in the slide above, I'll just flip back again, over 11,000 existing. The total capacity charge for a 5/8 inch meter now is calculated at $23.81. It is a significant drop. Again, a number of factors. No real need for a major expansion of facilities to accommodate new development. Also a reasonable asset valuation, and your assets are again quite functional, but they're pretty old at this point. So a more appropriate valuation was significantly lower. You'll see that we go by water meter size. Again, why are you using water meter size? It's used as a proxy in the industry to calculate the impact, your amount of capacity that you could have in terms of both water intake and sewer outtake is relative to your water meter size. And just a note that your multifamily residential charges per unit will always be at the lowest possible of the water meter sizes. So you may indeed have residential units that single family that come in at these larger amounts, but the multifamily will always be charged per unit at that lowest possible amount. Charges for any properties with meters over 2 inches will still have to be assessed individually, but it's fairly unusual for a single family dwelling to have a 2-inch meter. These commercial charges, again, the difference is in the flow rate is the same. BOD and TSS are slightly lower, so a slightly lower charge. Again, increases based on size of water meter as our proxy for capacity. The commercial high strength is more expensive because there is more value and use of the capacity that's existing in terms of your treatment capacity. Here's our benchmarking survey, and this was conducted of March of 2022. They tend to have a short shelf life, but I think it still will illustrate the point. And so this is at you're now at the low end of the capacity charges compared to these other districts. You were over here right next to Mountain View Sanitary District in terms of magnitude. Our revised analysis showed a significant drop, but again, we feel that this is reasonable and appropriate given the situation of your district, the age of your assets, the lack of need for a large expansion project to accommodate new development. And with that, I'll turn it to any questions or discussion that you might have.
Sally, thank you so much for the presentation. Directors, any questions or comments? I see Director Weiner.
Yeah, I have two questions. The value of our assets will rise in the coming years with the Clean and Green project. So we will have to reevaluate this after those projects are done.
Are they included? They may be included in the $90 million.
They are part of the bond.
Yeah,
proceeds.
bond. Did I get
So that was included in your analysis?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, yes, you can't actually include things that you haven't paid down yet because it is a bit of a snapshot. And so, Director Weiner, I would suggest that in 5 years, you look again at this, but as of today, you have that project is at least identified as being started to be part of your assets. It's like having, it's a house with the mortgage. You haven't paid off the mortgage yet, so you can't really claim it fully as an asset, but you will eventually be able to as you pay it off. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
As much as any of that makes sense. And then there is a business that recently paid for connection fees, our old connection fees. So my question to the board and to Justin is, can we review what they paid? And if our new charges are significantly less than what they paid for connection fees, can we consider grandfathering them in some way? This would be the Planting Justice and a cafe at the old Adachi site in El Sobrante. And that's all I have to say.
Just to add, we have been discussing about what to do in certain cases of if there have been recent connection fees paid and what to do about it. So I think that would be handled more on the administrative level. I believe there have been no new capacity or current connection fees paid this fiscal year. So that's kind of really what we're looking at. And then these fees would plan to be implemented or January 1st of 2023.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Director Weiner, for that question. Directors, any other questions or comments?
Director Alvarado and I reviewed the meeting. He may want to comment.
Well, all I want to say is that we did review this and there was lots of questions asked and answered. And we have the full confidence that this is a good proposal. So I'll give it over to Vice President Sutter to chime in as well.
Thank you, sir. Yes. And so thank you so much because you did incorporate many of the recommendations or suggestions we asked you to address. And so again, we did discuss this at the FNA meeting, this visual meeting. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both. Sally, on the last, second to the last slide there on the benchmarking, do we have what are nearby agencies like City of Richmond does? I see Pinole there. I didn't see Richmond. I'm not sure if we have that data or not.
Are we sure that Richmond provides it, or is it EB Mud providing portions of Richmond?
Both.
So there's a part of Richmond that we don't service.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to see what their capacity charges were, if we happen to have it. And if you don't, it's okay.
Yeah, I do not have that. And I would need to know what district they are within that portion of.
They're City of Richmond,
Okay,
just like you have here, City of Pinot.
yeah, okay,
We also manage a little sliver of the City of Pinot,
mhm,
of their sewage.
mhm,
And then the City of Pinot manages the rest of it.
mhm.
But we do process a portion of it. So
Okay,
this
so-
that you see here for the City of Pinot is for the portion that we don't administer.
Correct, for the one that you don't administer.
Yeah. So I wanted to see what it was for the City of Richmond for
Yeah.
what we don't administer, since that's an agency that we kind of share with.
Yeah.
Um,
We actually worked with the district staff to come up with this list, and that City of Richmond did not, was not requested at the time. It would be, fairly simple to just go online and look. I don't know if we need to update the report, et cetera, but
It's okay.
yeah.
No need to do it. I was just wondering if you have it.
No.
It sounds like I'm gonna take the lead.
Apologies, but I don't have it.
No word, no apologies needed. Thank you. So it
Okay.
sounds like the two directors that were part of the committee are good with it overall. It sounds like they had some good questions before.
We did have
Uh,
quite a robust discussion before, yeah.
Perfect. Then since it's coming out of committee, Director Alvarado, Vice President Suddeth, we'd like to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
I will second.
Perfect. Then the motion and the second is for the recommendation from the agenda. Do we have any further discussion?
And public comment, sir?
Yeah, or any public comment?
We have no written public comment. If there's anyone on our attendee list that wishes to make a public comment, now's the time to raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, we have no public comment on this item.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gibbs. All right, then we have a motion and a second. Ms. Gibbs, if you can please take the roll.
Sure. Director Alvarado,
Yes.
Director King Meredith,
Yes. Mhm.
Director Weiner,
Yes,
Vice President Suddeth,
Yes, ma'am.
President Zepeda,
Yes.
and the motion
What
passes.
happened?
Pardon?
All right, thank you. All right, Sally, thank you so much for the presentation. Greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure to work with West County Wastewater. Really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
Okay,
Have a great night.
thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. I'm not sure who's presenting, but if we can stop the screen share.
Oh, that might be. Hold on a second, see if I can get out of it.
Okay, while Sally closes out the presentation, we can move on to the introduction of the next item on our agenda, which is item 9. This is the introduction of our wastewater ordinance, fees and charges, board compensation ordinance, and informal bidding ordinance, which will in total amend and rescind the West County Wastewater District Code and schedule a public hearing, the second reading and adoption at the next regularly scheduled West County Wastewater meeting. Let's see. Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
So at this time, I'm going to turn it back to Justin Lovell to start the discussion, our Director of Administrative Services.
Good evening again. With me tonight, we'll be doing the majority of the presentation is Laura Ratcliffe with Hanson Bridget. So between with staff and with Hanson Bridget, we have actually been working on an ordinance revision for the last couple of years. So it's actually been a long project that we've been looking at kind of reshaping the format of how our West County wastewater ordinances are essentially the order, reviewing, updating. Some of the ordinances are referencing, items that are several decades old that are not necessarily relevant to the way we do business anymore. We know we are incorporating references to the recently adopted Stantec study that the board just adopted a minute ago. And so this is kind of a comprehensive look at everything we do as a district. And so we've put them into really are taking the recommendation. It won't occur tonight because as an ordinance, it will take a first waiving the first reading, and then we'll have to come back to the board at our next meeting to do formal adoption. But as we're introducing this item tonight, we were really introducing putting our ordinances kind of into 4 categories. So we're going to have there is a wastewater ordinance, which really covers a lot of the items that the infrastructure and planning and the water quality control plant operate. There's a fees and charges ordinance. There's a board compensation ordinance, and there's an informal bidding ordinance. Those are really our 4 main ordinances that will go into detail. Also, in the agenda packet tonight, we have taken a full review of the board policies and procedures, but the item is not for vote tonight. We did have quite a bit of discussion with the Finance and Administration Committee. The board policies and procedures will be coming back at the December 7th meeting for a full discussion. So tonight we really want to focus on the changes to the ordinances that were included in your packet. And so now I'd like to just turn it over to Laura to lead us through the update and the changes that we're recommending.
Thanks, Justin. Can everyone hear me all right? Take the
Yes.
silence as a yes.
Yes.
As Justin explained at the beginning, and I know I've presented this in 2 committees now, this really is a comprehensive, multi-pronged initiative that has been taking place over a couple of years with the help of infrastructure and planning, and on the finance side, updating these capacity charges. We also had done, when Hanson Bridget joined, a pretty comprehensive overview of the personnel policies. So a lot of Title II of the existing code has been moved to a personnel manual, and then the policies and procedures governing the internal workings of the board. Any kind of internal rule and regulation we're converting to a policy and procedure. So the ordinance will now be kind of stripped down into these more substantive and easier to identify where you are in the code ordinances, one relating to fees and charges, any kind of payments you need to make with the district in one place, and then the wastewater ordinance, which is a really comprehensive manual for connecting, permitting, plan review, discharge, anything relating to the discharge or use of the sewerage system. So yes, the new wastewater ordinance is restating and modifying Title 8 and Title 9. Title 9 changes were mostly limited to required changes from the EPA regarding regulation of industrial waste discharges into the system. So we worked extensively with that group, getting all of those provisions set up. We've also updated some of the fog regulation for fats, oils, and grease. And then we've before we joined, and I understand for many years, IMP has been working on this issue of private sewer lateral, what to do about defective sewer laterals that's causing I&I into the system. So that's a big piece that we've been tackling in updating that section of Title 8. We also went through, and this was a large effort because the last really substantive update to the code was in 1970. So all the references to the Uniform Plumbing Code were from the 1970 manual. So we had to go back to that manual, figure out what has changed. A lot actually has changed, and update all of our requirements to the 2021 version, bring those up into compliance on that end. And then, yeah, we really have streamlined and made clear the process for administrative appeals. If somebody's protesting permit denial or a fee that they don't want to pay, or any kind of engagement like that, beginning at the staff level, it gets appealed to a neutral arbitrator, third-party hearing officer that makes a recommendation to the board, and the board ultimately is the sort of judge of administrative appeals for the district. And if Michael is on the line, I think he's going to walk us through what updates we've made regarding private sewer laterals.
Thank you, Laura. As you all are aware, laterals are a big portion of the way that folks connect to our system in the district. And laterals account for about 50% of the service calls that we get called out on. Bad laterals obviously lead to a number of things that we don't want in the system, mainly negative impacts to the environment and substantial I&I down at our treatment plant. Next slide, please. The district has some different obligations around why we need to enforce or make sure that laterals are in compliance. And we have requirements around what it means to be in compliance. And this section of the presentation really talks about our enforcement or our methods by which we can persuade compliance. We have a mission that speaks to us being responsible about how we collect and treat wastewater and protecting the environment. We also have an obligation to reduce I&I, whether it be from our state water board, who has told us we need to get the I&I out of a system, some of the other agencies or companies that we've been involved with, like Riverwatch and Baykeepers, who have came in when we've had issues with our system. So we have some requirements and some obligations to reduce the I&I in the system. And then we have a obligation to be equitable about the way that we enforce and making sure that we're enforcing the same way across the board and not enforcing heavily in some areas and turning a blind eye in other areas. Next slide, please. Currently, how we figure out about compliance or about the condition of laterals is we have a point of sale ordinance which requires that laterals are brought into compliance before the close of escrow. If and when folks adhere to that, they bring us in a video, we inspect the lateral, and we determine whether or not the lateral is in compliance. And we share the requirements at that time if they're not in compliance in terms of what they need to do to come into compliance to get a certificate of compliance to close their escrow. There's also the issue of building permits. When someone goes to a neighboring agency to get a building permit, they normally send them over to our district to get a stamp from us on their plans. At this time, we check and make sure that their laterals are in compliance. This is our one real bite at the apple. So we check to make sure that their laterals are in compliance. If they're not, then we work with them to bring them into compliance. The last way is through catastrophic failure. So someone has their lateral fail, there's sewage coming up in their backyard or their neighbor's backyard or front yard or something like that. And we're called out to investigate, and we go through the steps to help them come into compliance at that point. What we've currently been doing is, and this is our historic method, what we've currently been doing is we have an I&I study that was about I think it was 4 years long. It identified for us some of the worst contributors to I&I, the worst basins, the worst areas in the district contributing to I&I. We've used that to focus our capital projects in terms of our gravity pipe replacement in order to try to reduce the I&I as much as possible. As we're going through and we're CCTVing the lines that need to be replaced in our gravity pipe projects, we're using a new tool called a lateral launcher, which is essentially a smaller camera that mounts on top of our large camera. It allows us to shoot up laterals and inspect those at the time that we're inspecting our own lines. And we've been able to identify a lot of laterals that are not in compliance that we otherwise would not have caught with these older methods. Next slide, please. Our current practice is what this slide is about. And really what I wanted to talk about first was why we enforce to begin with and the purpose of enforcement. And just be clear that enforcement is not about punishment. It's really about persuading compliance. And again, we have obligations to make sure that folks are in compliance for the reasons that I mentioned before, the discharge permit compliance, the settlements, as well as reducing illicit discharges at our plant. Our current practice is when we find that someone is not in compliance, we send them a letter, which is known as a notice of violation. If they still are not don't come into compliance, we send them more letters. And essentially, that is our practice. We don't have much of any further enforcement that we're currently utilizing. And a big part of that is it's just not clear in our current ordinance where that lies. As we understand it, we're not adding anything to the ordinance that wasn't already within our rights or within our authority to do. We're making it extremely clear what our rights and authority is in our current ordinance so that we can add additional methods of enforcement. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing in terms of the ordinance updates and the language that we're adding to the ordinance is essentially continuing the notice of violations, at some point stepping up to financial penalties or fines, liens on properties, repairing or replacing defective laterals through district means, litigation, and then ultimately termination of service if we've removed all honest hurdles, which is what we're trying to do with a number of these, and folks still won't come into compliance. Alongside this effort, we're also looking to develop an internal policy that'll clarify how we actually impose the different enforcement methods. And I just want to make one thing clear before we move on. The termination of service will absolutely require staff to come back to the board for a hearing, a public hearing, and an authorization of the board before that is affected. And the financial penalties are something that the board will definitely have to work with staff in order to adopt those financial penalties. Next slide, please. I think this is back to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so these are the substantive revisions to this section of the wastewater ordinance. The private sewer lateral section used to be tucked under, I think it was in the Uniform Plumbing Code section. We've created a standalone chapter just sort of emphasizing the importance of this and just giving folks, when you're glancing through the ordinance, all the information right there. As Michael said, we're not creating new options for the district. You know, all of these powers were within the district's authority through the Health and Safety Code. But just clarifying basically the ceiling. We can do all of these things up to and including termination of service, but we will probably, you know, make it clear that this is an escalating process. And then, like Michael said, just really clarifying the point of sale process. So we had this in the ordinance before, but we've really fleshed it out. We've talked about all the different options that we have on the table to really capture that moment in time when money's being changed hands. A lot of renovations might be going on. It's a great opportunity to come into compliance. It should be part of a home inspection, but in this market, a lot of times people are waiving inspections altogether. We're going to capture that ability for the buyer to get an extension to wait until the property is transferred because they don't want to invest in a property that maybe will fall out of escrow. The seller might not have the funds available, or you know, don't want to invest any more in the property because they don't have the funds yet. So it's granting this time extension certificate allows a 90-day period for the parties to work out how exactly this will happen and make sure that somebody fixes it, somebody pays for the lateral to come into compliance. Okay, any questions on that? I think that's same slide. So that's up where we are with the wastewater ordinance. Maybe we'll pause here and see if there's any questions on the private sewer lateral or anything else relating to the wastewater ordinance before we move on to fees and charges.
Director Reno, go ahead. You're on mute, Director Reno.
I just wanted to remind everybody, we do have a carrot and we call it pipes. And we might, it's pipes has to be refunded all the time, but we might include that as one of the ways we encourage people to pay for their laterals.
Great suggestion.
That's a great point. I don't know, Michael, if you had any comments on that. That is definitely a part of the process. And in identifying these, we let folks know that there could potentially be funds available depending on the level of funds at the time. But agreed, like Michael said, we're not trying to penalize people who may not be in the financial position to fix it in the first place. Finding them and leaning their property isn't going to fix the problem. Having creative solutions to help people come into compliance is better for everybody.
Directors, any other questions on this part?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I think that bringing up pipes is good. The only thing I would say is that the pipes program does not alleviate the responsibilities that the ordinance underscores. So I think that if at some point we no longer have the pipes program, the responsibilities are still there under the ordinance. So I think that those are two separate things that we're addressing, right? The ordinance is addressing the responsibility of the home or property owner, and we can talk about the pipes. It has to be a separate thing, right? The pipes is our way of, as long as we can maintain or continue the pipes program, is being able to reimburse at that level. But if for some reason we're not able to continue the pipes program, this is still a responsibility that has to be on the homeowner or property owner.
Yeah, but I think
That's
that
right.
the pipes program is, as Director Wiener said, it's sort of a carrot, right? If we have to, one of the previous slides was, they send a letter out and they send another letter out and they send another letter out. But I think maybe in there, and Michael, I don't know if you're already doing it or not, but maybe incorporating and saying, hey, we can help you if we have funds with the pipes project or program.
But Director Zepeda, that's in a process. This is an ordinance, and so the pipes is an incentive. Is not a part of the ordinance. The ordinance itself is a responsibility, regardless of whether we have the pipes process or not. And what I'm saying is those are two separate things. The responsibility, whether or not they have the reimbursements, right? So part of the process may be what the two of you are saying, which I think is great, is that part of the process is you must follow this ordinance. And by the way, we do have this program that could help you if you have a problem or if you're having issues meeting your obligation. But there's not part of the ordinance. Mr. Savannah has his hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Director Sudduth. I really appreciate the comments. And I think when we put this presentation together, what we were looking to do is define what we were adding or changing or emphasizing in the ordinance. We didn't get into our processes. And just for the information of the board and the public, we do advertise and we do inform the public about our pipes program through our process when we send out our letters, but we didn't include that or much detail about the other remedies in this presentation. Laura, would you mind going back a couple of slides to the one where we show the proposed remedies or proposed enforcement? There's a number of things here. Everything here has detail and it has a procedure and it has a process to it, which is not defined here. The pipes information would be in the first letter, the second letter, the third letter that go out. There's also, when we talk about the repair and replacement, what we're actually proposing here is removing honest hurdles for people and setting up a potential financing program here, which would allow folks to have this work done by the district and then to pay the district back over an amount of time. These are all remedies that are available to the district, and we didn't put extreme detail into here. So point taken, Director Weiner, and the PIPES program is absolutely something that we advertise and we push out and we inform the public on. We have information on the website, and it's also in every piece of literature that we send out when we're telling folks that they're in violation. But again, to Director Southern's point, we were really speaking of the ordinance and the information for the ordinance update, not necessarily our detailed processes.
Thank you, Michael. Directors, any other questions or comments? All right. This was brought to the to our committee, I believe it was last week. My only comment that I had was to continue working with the Realtors Association, just because they are going to be one of the ways that we can find out whenever a home has been sold or is about to be sold, right? Because there's not a lot of ways for us to find out until it's actually happened, or as you see the couple of the slides before, if there's an issue, then that's when we find out. If somebody happens to tell us or they're doing a project, that's when we find out. But we really want to do it at the beginning when they're just buying or selling that home. So I have suggested that we reach out or continue to reach out to them. I know that we're already talking to them to see if we can establish some kind of partnership there. So, all right, if there's no other questions or comments from the directors, then I think we can move us forward.
All right, thank you. We will jump now to fees and charges. This will be more straightforward. Basically, sprinkled throughout the code, there were different provisions relating to when we assess fees and charges, mostly in Chapter 6, but also in Chapter 8, Chapter 9. So we've consolidated all of those sections into one sort of overarching ordinance. The biggest change was what you just heard from Sally relating to the capacity charges. That study had been in the works for some time, and we decided to line it up and integrate it into this ordinance adoption so we could do a full bore repeal of the code. And then concurrently with this, if the board approves the ordinance after the second reading next month, we will also adopt a new fee schedule to reflect the new capacity charges and any other fees that need to be updated. So this is the Stantec study, and Sally did such a nice job with her presentation. I don't think we need to go over this again, but essentially, as she said, will result in a lower capacity charges on a go-forward basis after January 1. And that's fees and charges. Then the final two ordinances, standalone ordinances that will be sort of taken from the old code into a new standalone ordinance is the informal bidding ordinance. That's just being updated, or not even updated, that's just being readopted in the form that it was adopted by the board a few years ago. And then board compensation under the water code, under the health and safety code and the water code, in order for directors to get paid, there has to be a formal adoption of an ordinance, and then there's some notice and hearing requirements. We're not sure we have to go through all that since we're not raising the compensation for the directors at this time. That's something you can consider as we go forward, but we're just keeping comp the same. But in order to continue to pay you, we need to go through this process to adopt the board compensation. So we'll be conducting a public hearing at the next meeting to comply with the water code provisions relating to board compensation. And finally, we have taken, to Vice President Soto's point, ordinances in my mind are external regulation of third parties. Rules governing our own internal policies, the board's actions, staff actions, really, in my mind, belongs in a policy. So for example, the PIPES program, I think it's nice to have in a policy, because then if the program changes or you stop doing it, you don't have to go back and repeal the ordinance. We're not trying to govern ourselves in an ordinance. So we've taken all of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Title 1 and Title 2 of the code into this comprehensive ordinance policies and procedures manual. And we will be hearing, the board will be taking action on this item at the next meeting. So we're going to skip this part of our presentation, hold it over till next month, but you've got them in your board packets, and we welcome any comments or conversation on those as well for next time. Nicole, did you have anything to add on the policies and procedures aspect?
No, I think that's exactly right, because this item the policies and procedures doesn't need the 2 steps that you need for an ordinance adoption. That action is next month, and that action will come with a more fulsome discussion. I think, as Laura mentioned, this has been, and I will just take the opportunity to really credit the work of staff. Laura has been working with staff for quite a while to pull all of these ordinances and all of these different moving pieces together and to update them. It's a really substantial effort. And so in line with kind of the size of the effort, we wanted to be sure that we were being as transparent as possible. So we've included the full package here in your board packet tonight, although the board policies discussion is deferred till next month. As Laura said, we're also holding a public hearing to make sure that we have really kind of maximum opportunity for the board and members of the public to review and to raise any questions or concerns that they might have on, what are really foundational documents and important documents to the agency. So I think that's our proposed approach here. And if there are any questions, we are happy to respond.
Thank you, Nicole. Board, does anyone have any questions or comments?
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
Dr. Alvarado and I, we spent a lot of time on these on our F&A committee, and to giving quite a bit of feedback, but knowing that, and before we move this to the full board. And so my comment would be, before we bring these back at our next meeting, is that all of the board members do take some time to look at this away from the board meeting. And so we all come back to the board meeting ready to really go through this in a much more deliberate fashion. So it's we come to these, and if there's questions ahead of time, obviously try and send those in, and maybe speak to general counsel, send those questions in before, so that they can try and get us the information ahead of time, because there are some nuanced changes. There's not a lot, and Ms. Nicole, you may want to tell them what you mean by substantial, like you explained it to us, the definition of substantial change is, as you explained it to the committee, when you and Sir Justin presented it to us. But I would like to implore fellow directors to really take time to look at this ahead of time, and not just make this the first time you look at this at the next board meeting, because it is quite a weighty document, and it does have implications for how we do business moving forward. So, Ms. Nicole.
That's absolutely right. Thank you, Vice President Seta. So, and I would just add that one of the additional documents that we're going to, or well, a few of the additional documents we're going to provide related to board policies includes a red line, which will be, I think, a challenge to work through. But as Vice President Seta has mentioned, this is an important document. These are the rules that govern the board. And so it's really important that folks have the opportunity to understand everything that is being proposed at this stage. But as you will see, once we kind of get to that point in the discussion, we are noting all of the areas either in slide or in our presentation where there are changes that are substantive, which means something that isn't just an update in language or other typographical error or corrections or minor clarifying edits we've tried to call out. So we've really kind of gone out of our way to make sure that we are noting everything to facilitate your review. But in advance of the next meeting, I agree with Director Seta that it would be great for folks to sit and take some time with it.
Yeah, and I, as chair of the committee, I can't emphasize the importance of really understanding and really coming to the board meeting prepared with questions. Even having those questions answered before the board meeting, if possible, because this was a long process. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you both for bringing this from the committee. If there's no other questions or comments, I think we move on. Is there anything else that we have, Laura?
Nope, that's it. So if, assuming that we proceed on our schedule of the next meeting, second reading, we will then publish, there's some publication requirements before they can go into effect. We're targeting a date of January 1st, just to make it simple. Everything, the new rule comes in and we'll repeal the entire code on that date, unless there are some reasons why we're not going to, adopt some of the policies or the ordinance or anything that comes up. But our plan right now is to repeal the entire code, and we'll have a new kind of scheme, rules and regulations of the district going forward in 2023.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Laura. Then there's no motion on this here because we have to wait next time. So with that,
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yes, Laura and I are jumping in on the same point. Well, 2 points. One, I think we still need to ask for public comment on this, and we would request a motion on this item, really just a motion to schedule the public hearing and second reading of the ordinances. This was our preliminary introduction, and so we would just request a motion for those second 2 pieces.
perfect. Thank you, Nicole. All right, do we have a motion?
Chair
I'm sorry.
Alvarado, do you want to move it?
I'm sorry,
What she
public
said.
comment, if we could.
I moved the item, what she said.
Wait. General Counsel had a comment first.
I apologize. If we could just ask for public comment, that
Yes.
might have gotten missed in my
Yes,
rush
I
to
think
what's
so.
next.
Perfect, yep.
Okay.
So we have no written comment that's come in on this item. If there are any attendees that wish to speak, now is the time to raise your hand for public comment on this. Seeing none, we have no public comment. General
Thank you.
Okay, so sir, back on track.
All right. My motion is the motion requested by Attorney Witt. Thank you.
All right, do we have a second?
I will second.
All right, perfect. Thank you both. All right, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Gibbs, if you wouldn't mind, please taking the roll.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Director Alvarado,
Yes.
Director King Meredith,
Yes. Yes.
Director Weiner,
Yes.
Vice President Siddeth,
Yes, ma'am.
President Zepeda.
Yes.
Okay, and the motion passes by 5. And that second, was that?
That was, that would be me, Vice
Vice
President.
President Suddeth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on our agenda this evening is other business. And the first item under other business is reports from staff, general manager, and general counsel. We do have the check register for October and the quarterly investment reports in your packet. And we are happy to answer any questions that you have on either of those items at this time.
All right, directors, are there any questions? All right,
None for me. Thank you for the reports.
thank you, Ms. GM. All right, next item.
So then the next item is director's comments and meeting reports.
All right, directors, does anyone have anything to report? All right, I'm seeing a lot of no's and I see 1 yes. All right, Director Suddeth, just keeping in mind the time. I know you
So-
attend everything.
So let me just give you a 90-second rundown. How about that?
Perfect.
Girls mentor meeting on science and technology and water in Contra Costa. So we're looking to start a new circle there on the 3rd. Was able to, and then I would just say I can give you a written report. How about that? And then tomorrow I will be leaving to go down to Latinos in Water, our well untapped network. So I'm leaving in the morning for that for the weekend. And then next week I will be attending Aqua. There you go. It was fast enough for you, right?
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Directors, anyone else? All right. Just really quickly, we had the levy project meeting today. I saw a few of you attended, so thank you for attending. It's a great meeting and it's getting more and more eyes on it and more people involved. People have talked to me about it that either didn't realize I was already part of it and they were just telling me how great of a project. And I was like, yes, it is. It is our agency. So great work, everyone that's involved, and thank you for everyone. All right, I'll also keep it short. Unless anyone has anything else to report, then we'll go on to the next item.
The next item is adjournment.
Perfect. Unless anyone has any opposition, we'll adjourn. Ms. Gibbs, we'd like to adjourn us.
Sure, let's adjourn this meeting at 8:41 p.m. Our next regular board meeting is December 7th. See you then.
December already. All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
All right, same here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll see you all tomorrow.
Yes.
Right, tomorrow.
Bye.
Right.
All right, thank you. Good night.
I know your team. Bye.
Bye-bye.